To the Egyptians, it was known as Ta-Se, or the land of the bow. The people that lived there were dark-skinned, and they hoarded incalculable amounts of gold. With that gold, they formed an empire, spanning across East Africa. Yet their legacy, their people, would be lost to time, forgotten in the eyes of history. Today we remember Nubia, the forgotten empire. It is hard to tell when the Nuba people began to populate the land around the southern Nile River. What we mostly know about them are for scattered records and ancient ruins. We know that they were farmers, centering around the Nile for agriculture and trade. This, however, put them into contact with powerful neighbors, specifically the Kingdom of Egypt to the north. The Egyptians had settled at the base of the Nile River Delta and begun expanding. This is today what we know as the Old Kingdom period. Soon they reached the land of the Nuba people. It is unknown what the initial relationships were, but it was probably centered around trade, as all things were at the time. Yet, Egypt kept expanding, claiming more and more of the area around the Nile River. The first Nubian city was Kerma, established in 2400 BCE. The city was so strong and influential that the Egyptians were forced to erect forts to halt the raids from the south. Despite this, trade continued to flow between the two kingdoms, as Egyptian markets flooded with luxury items from Kerma, such as ivory, gold, ebony, incense, and a variety of exotic animals. This civilization we now know today as Nubia because of the Nuba people, but for a while it was known as Kush, with the kingdom of Kerma being only the beginning of the Kushite, or Nubian as we know it today, empire. Unfortunately, despite the flourishing of the kingdom of Kerma up until 2000 BCE, it was eventually conquered by the Egyptian king Mentuhotep II by the beginning of the Middle Kingdom era for Egypt. However, despite Egyptian occupation, Kerma continued to thrive, soon becoming one of the largest cities in all of Egypt. During the Second Intermediate Period of Egypt in 1782 BCE, the dynasty of Hyksos conquered northern Egypt. The Kushites of Kerma saw their chance and threw off their Egyptian overlords, expanding up the Nile River and therefore establishing a trade-based relationship with the Hyksos dynasty, until it was overthrown by the Egyptian armies in 1570 BCE. The fighting between Egypt and Nubia continued for over 150 years, until around 1450 BCE. The end of the city of Kerma, however, is generally dated back to 50 years earlier, in 1500 BCE, when the city was burnt to the ground by Thutmose I of Egypt. His son, Thutmose III, would establish a new city further down the Nile, after finishing off the last of the Nubian armies. This city, Nabata, quickly became the region's capital, and grew to the size of Kerma in only a short period of time. Not much is known about Nabata under Egyptian rule, as a lack of written record makes it very hard, although we do know it was clearly influenced by Egyptian culture from the very beginning. Rulers were buried in pyramid tombs with grave goods at their sides. Scholar Derek A. Wellesby notes how, quote, "Studying the kingdom of Kush is like a detective story, in which a number of disparate and often contradictory facts must be woven into a coherent and plausible narrative of events." Unquote. Despite this, we do know that Nabata became the religious center of the region and became a very wealthy city due to trade from the southern Nile River. As the Middle Kingdom came to an end and the New Kingdom ran its course, Nabata gained power and influence unmatched in Egypt. By the decline of the New Kingdom in 1069 BCE, Nabata practically ran itself as an independent state in the south of Egypt. By this time in the New Kingdom, the Egyptian priests practically assumed total control of Upper Egypt. They assumed the rule from Thebes, while a pharaoh resided in Tanis, only holding power over Lower Egypt. Egypt's weakness was Kush's strength, however, and the official start to the New Kingdom of Kush is dated to 1069 BCE, when the Kushite kings were able to reign without fear or reference to the Egyptian monarchs or policies. Napata was chosen as the capital of the new kingdom, which continued to trade with Egypt, but were able to expand their commerce now to other nations. At first, kings were still buried at Kerma, out of respect for the fallen city, but even that eventually moved to Napata. The kingdom grew steadily, until it was powerful enough to take whatever it wanted from Egypt, whenever it pleased. And yet, when the time came, they did not enter Egypt as conquerors, but as rulers, intent on preserving Egyptian culture among civil war. The third intermediate period in Egypt, although not as dark and chaotic as early Egyptologists have claimed, saw a general decline in the wealth and international prestige of the nation. At the same time, Nubia was flourishing with the first Nubian king, known by the name Alara, unifying the kingdom and consolidating religious rights and centered at Napata. His dates are unknown, although they have many suggested possibilities, and he would have become a legendary figure to the people of Kush for a long and prosperous reign. Unfortunately, his existence is only verified through the ancient inscriptions and the discovery of what is most likely his tomb, meaning he may be part myth, although we will never be sure. As Egypt declined further, Nubia grew in strength. King Amenardas I would soon march on Thebes and take direct control of Upper Egypt, while also claiming lordship over Lower Egypt. Lower Egypt, however, was much harder to take control of, and at the time, it was embroiled in a civil war between many princes. When Amenardas' son, Pi, marched north to take control, he pretty much just let the princes be lords of their own territory, in exchange for them paying him taxes and acknowledging them as their lord. Many would have advised rule from Thebes from now on, but Pi decided to continue his rule from the now massive city of Napata, which had come to eclipse Kerma and become the largest city in the empire. Pi's brother, Shabaka, succeeded him after his death. Shabaka and his nephew would be the last great kings of this golden age of Nubia. Shabaka's nephew would have to deal with rising tensions in the Assyrian Empire to the north. Throughout the 700s and 600s BCE, the Nubian kings would fight continuous wars with the Assyrians until they eventually had to let go of Egypt in 666 BCE. From here, Egypt was ruled by an Assyrian puppet king until he was overthrown by Psamtik I. Everything was going fine for Egypt and Nubia until Psamtik II, the grandson of the first, came along. Psamtik II decided he needed a glorious conquest to justify his rule, since it was shaky at best. So he set his eyes on the unprepared Nubian Empire, which he had recently been allies with. He sacked and burned the towns across Nubia until he reached the capital of Napata. Then he burned it to the ground and decided to go home. Now we find ourselves at the last period of the Nubian Empire. This period centers around the great city of Meroe. After the destruction of Napata in 590 BC, the Nubians moved their capital south for safety. They decided that the fusion of Nubian and Egyptian culture as an influence over the empire could stay, until Arkamani I stopped it in the late 100s BCE. King Arkamani was educated in Greek philosophy, and he decided that he didn't believe in the gods anymore, so he had the priests killed, and he banned Egyptian culture from the realm. Arkamani I discarded the old Egyptian hieroglyphic script in favor of a new one known as Meroitic, which unfortunately has not yet been deciphered. The fashion of the people in Meroe around this time shifts away from the distinctly Egyptian to a distinctly Nubian style, and the gods of the Egyptians became assimilated into Kushite deities such as Apadamic. The tradition of burying royalty at Napata was also abandoned, and the kings would henceforth be buried at Meroe. Another interesting innovation of Arkamani I's reign was his establishment of female monarchs in Meroe. These queens were known as Kandakis, and they ruled between 284 BCE and 314 CE. The earliest recorded queen is Shanak Takete in 170 BCE, who is shown in full armor leading her troops into battle. The title of Kandake is thought to mean Queen Mother, but exactly what it refers to is unclear. It may have also meant royal women or mother of the king initially, but the queens who held the title appear as monarchs who were not defined by their relationship with others. One of these queens, Amaniris, led her people successfully through the Meroic War between Nubia and Rome in 27 through 22 BCE. At the end of the war, she was able to get favorable terms in the peace treaty with Augustus Caesar himself. At its height, Meroe became one of the wealthiest cities in the world, and its cultural influence was massive around Africa. Unfortunately, it would turn out to be Nubia's last great hurrah, as in 330 CE, the Axumites invaded and sacked Meroe. Although the city would continue on for another 20 years, it was effectively destroyed. Even if the invasion had not happened, massive deforestation and drought had brought the city's industry to a grinding halt, and would eventually be abandoned. The last people finally left the great city in 350 CE, over 200 years after the fall of the Western Roman Empire. Nubia lasted for a period of over 2,750 years. To put that in perspective, it was about 600 years from the beginning of the Roman Republic to the fall of the Western Roman Empire. They grew with the ancient Egyptians, and their last native kingdom fell 200 years after Rome did. This is one of the longest lasting cultures in history, and yet few people know about it. The Nubians were doomed to be forgotten, washed away in the sands of time. Thank you for watching. Be sure to leave suggestions for future videos in the comment section below. If you would like to check my sources, they are listed in the description. Be sure to subscribe, and check out my other videos if you have not done so. Thank you.